Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the stream. So, yeah, quick recap of where we are. So, last week I started kind of getting into the meat of the Laurel programming language, and the three kind of novelties that I was probably most excited about getting into the language in general uh, were more or less resolved last week, which was nice. And the three of those were, first of all, allowing commands or allowing this kind of syntax on strings. So we can basically define a string as, uh, a string consisting of a program, such as, well, of course, ideas fail me now, but we might have the program Python, and we added the ability to just call programs directly, which gives a lightweight syntax to calling programs in the language. I also added in the idea that any unadorned identifiers will specify strings. That did mean that we had to modify the variable and function kind of identifier space to have dollar signs as prefixes, so that we don't have conflicts between the two. And then the third innovation was that we could add these dots to basically the kind of chaining syntax that we're used to in regular languages could be applied to allow us to basically, as an alternative syntax to putting command arguments in the parameter list. If we decided that the first few arguments, first few positional arguments were actually specifying subcommands, then we could chain them using this kind of dot notation to hopefully make the command a little more readable and potentially a little more lightweight. Well, maybe not lightweight, but more readable, hopefully, and give it kind of a more perhaps a look and feel that we're potentially more used to from other programming languages, especially object-oriented languages or languages that borrow ideas from object-oriented languages. So those were kind of three things that I thought might take a little longer to actually implement than they ended up taking. Now, one of the things that I decided at the time was to include hyphens in the kind of identifier space now, or the string space. And now this is one thing that I potentially will revise in coming episodes. I still haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with it, because I can potentially, I suppose, I it, it's something that I could foresee causing some issues down the line in terms of, for example, just making things a little less clear, simply because of the fact that it's also used as both the unary minus and the is a dyadic minus operator. So for those reasons, I'm going to potentially revise that. I'll see in coming sessions, but for now I'll be leaving it as it is. One thing I will be revising, though, to start off this session is, though I do like the syntaxes that I've introduced in terms of the parentheses for the direct parentheses for program calls, and dots for kind of subcommand chaining. I am potentially going to remove support for those, or modify the support for those, just so that we're not overloading the same operators, because while I think a lot of developers do like the cleverness of operator overloading, and the fact that I suppose one issue that I see with operator overloading is that with strong typing, or with well, I suppose the Laurel language, even though it's dynamically typed, it also has strong typing, so it can, if you give two arguments to an operator that it doesn't support, then it can immediately say, um, you know, those are of the wrong type, and that can be very valuable for identifying errors, basically. If you're passing the wrong types to something, it probably means that you're doing the wrong thing. However, what operator overloading tends to do is, because you're increasing the operations of that operator, you're basically allowing different types to be supported by that operator for different purposes. And that can sometimes um, hide errors in plain sight. So what's an example of this? For example, one obvious one could be so up here I had this let's see, I had some sample code. In fact, I'll get rid of some of this. Oh, sorry, there's a comment here from Game Reapers. Okay, sorry. So that that looks, yeah. So continuing on. So we have, for example, this Python command that we're running, and say we wanted to, for example, encapsulate the version of Python that we're using. So we put that into a variable. And we say, okay, it's actually going to be calling Python 3, and then we might have a switch up here that says, okay, if Python 3 isn't found, then you fall back to Python 2. And then down here, we don't care what version of Python we're doing. We're just pushing a string onto this variable. And that would be fine. For example, if I run this now, I should be getting the same result. This script doesn't exist, so I won't, it won't even be running it. But so unwrap on print, yeah, so I missed a semicolon there. So that's that's kind of nice on its own. However, if we can imagine the case where we have a slightly longer script, and modifications might be happening, variables might be getting updated, somewhere along the way the Python variable, which contains a string, accidentally gets updated to contain an object for some reason. And this, well, maybe not this, but if we had some other thing that evaluated to a string, so for example, Python, I don't know, just ABC, basically we can get into scenarios where this looks like it's doing one thing, but it's actually doing a different thing. So we might think, okay, this is creating a string, which is then getting appended onto as a subcommand of this program, and we're running a program at the end. But it could be the case that this somewhere along the way got modified to be an object, and then this is actually a field lookup of the object, and then we're calling a function contained in an object field. And that can be nice in its own way. It's like, oh, that's cool, we can hide implementation details. But for me, I think at the end of the day, this basically obscures bugs and makes the actual intention of the code less clear, or makes the code less readable, because this can now mean two different things depending on the data that's in $Python. Whereas and that's due to the overloading of both the dot and the parentheses, which again, it's a nice parallel, but maybe for the interest of keeping things correct, I would replace the dot notation with colons, and the parentheses notation for running commands with just add an extra colon in there. So that should be hopefully a quick enough modification to implement. So if I go into parser LALRPOP, well, no, it won't be the quickest thing to do, but it shouldn't be too difficult either. So the first thing to do, and the reason it won't be as straightforward I might hope is because it'll also be introducing, you know, the fact that it was being overloaded meant the operations could kind of piggyback on existing AST nodes, whereas now they won't be. But one nice, oh wait, actually, so I had actually split this into subcommands. So actually this one should be straightforward enough to implement. So if I just replace that, and again the LALRPOP parser generator phase can take a few seconds. So we're actually getting a conflict here. So maybe this syntax, and again, I know I always keep coming back to this, but the fact that we've gotten a conflict here is one of the reasons why I wanted to do all of this kind of stuff with a full-featured, semi-full-featured language, because it can identify conflicts before using features that I already know I want. So colons seem to be out. Now, why is that? That's probably due to parsing something like what? It's probably potentially parsing an object, although it's not quite obvious to me from reading this output what exactly is causing the conflict. It is a pity in in the interim I was kind of getting fixated on this colon as the operator I'd be using here. No, that's not making itself obvious. So what other operator could I use in this place? Again, I don't necessarily have to define the final operator that that I'm going to be using in this place. It can just be a placeholder. So something like that until I figure out exactly what syntax I want to use for this in the long term. But I suppose I am thinking that I do want to make the operator more explicit that it is something different. So yeah, can't open ABC. That's all right. So that's at least compiling. So what I'll do is, and can I put in maybe test.py, and test.py will just print hi, and that's not actually the worst syntax. It's all right. So that works. So yeah, I'll just add that as a little improvement to say, replace overloaded dot operator with that. And then the next one I want to do is probably something similar for calling commands. So now this will require a bit of refactoring of the evaluator. So let's see. First of all, I need to find out where the function calls occur. They bind pretty loosely, so they'd be towards the end, I believe. Yeah, we have an application. So this will be turning back to a function call. And we'll call this, instead of a call, this will be a spawn. And we'll go into AST. And even though it's different, it'll take all the same stuff. And let me think. Now, because it takes all the same stuff in general, I could actually, even though I use a separate syntax kind of on the front end for these, I could say that, I have an extra Boolean parameter here to say, is spawn. Probably a little cleaner to keep the concepts separated at the moment. That's more intuition and gut feeling than anything concrete. But with that in place, I will update the. Well, first of all, let's just check it does. So that should be enough to get it generating an AST, and then we'll get an issue saying it's not being handled by the evaluator, that the pattern match isn't exhaustive. But as long as we get past the whatchamacallit, yeah, so non-exhaustive pattern. So we've gotten past the code generator, so there don't seem to be conflicts. So that's good at least. So spawn here, expression and args. So we can now remove both of these. So this syntax can be called on a string or a command. So it'll be can only spawn strings or commands. And then above here we'll have can only call functions. And in the spawning section, so we can remove the call binding for commands. Whoops, what have I done? And let's see, that can be, I think, just evaluated in place. Though both of those, I probably don't need to mess around with that too much for the moment. It can probably be, well, it definitely doesn't have to be matched on. So that would have program and args. Same there, except I can get rid of the underscore there. And then at this point, I can unindent those a bit. One more. And I'll remove command from the call binding. So let's check that out. So 1204, V isn't present. So what should be returned from that section. I think I can get rid of that, can't I? Because each of these are returning things. And that should just be, oh, that's a mismatched type. And new valref. Just a matter of wrapping that in. Okay, there'll still be a non-exhaustive issue. So 295 spawn. And that is 138. So there's an unused source. Probably do it like that. And so now hopefully we have a slightly tighter syntax so that if I remove that and I attempt to treat this like a function when it's not, then we get the expected error. So again, this is just making things a bit more explicit. I can always play around with this, test it out a bit, and see if it's what I want. Eventually, I can always revert this, I would say, easily enough. But it's probably easier to remove than to add back in later, I would say. So what was my message for the last replace overloaded that operator? And there we go. So that was a quick tidy up from just of some concepts that I wanted to make more explicit since last week. So continuing on, what I really wanted to focus on today is put a bit more structure on what I'm going to be working on for the next while. And so most of the core programming language part of this language is more or less done. So what I'm wanting to do is start getting into the more domain specific aspects. So, you know, I've started working on processes somewhat and spawning them. What I also will need to do in that regard is working around pipes. The language itself will, in contrast to Bash, because I think so used to having to set fail is it exit error and pipe fail and things like that, that this language will actually do those by default, and then you'll have a lightweight syntax to recover in the case of errors. This is one language level aspect that still has to be clarified, because the base left it generic as to exactly what representation will be used, and I'll be just looking at making this a bit more concrete for the domain of this language, looking at error handling, looking at importing, looking at globbing. And then there is a couple of areas that I still need to research and decide exactly what I want to do. But this is kind of a general to-do list, or kind of laundry list of things that I want to get done. But what I also want to do is have a little project that I'm going to be trying work my way through and seeing how would I write that script, an existing bash script in the Laurel programming language. And the script that I'm going to use for that is the get docker script. So, you know, it's a relatively complex script. Not too long, but not too short either. It's using a lot of bash isms. So, for example, it's using special syntax and interpolation for stripping characters. It's accessing the environment. It's using um, kind of bash's special syntax for testing, giving things default values. It's using it's iterating through arguments. It's defining inner processes and returning values from those in the way that bash, like so in bash scripts, or I suppose this is more actually a shell script rather than a bash script, so I use the two interchangeably, even though there is a distinction. But in shell, we even though we want to return, say, a Boolean value here, we kind of treat this as a process, so we return non-zero instead. We have what could be handled in general using more abstractions and perhaps cleaner code. We have to delegate to using, it still is kind of very clean and lightweight in its own way, but it's perhaps not as intuitive, especially to people who don't use shell on a day-to-day. So things like the possibly more direct but requiring a lot of domain-specific language or domain-specific knowledge to understand. So, for example, I have to understand that this will output standard out, that pipe will push the standard out from that to standard in of this, and even the very, I would say, funny syntax of cut, the fact that you I don't think you can have a space between, for example, in typical commands, you can have a space between the flag and the argument to the flag, but you can't in cut. The fact that this is delimiter and this is field, and like there's a lot going on where it's, I would say, a steep learning curve. So seeing, what I'll be developing, I would say won't, won't beat it in terms of code size and things like that. But I would imagine, for example, things like this, I would say will be things like this would be things that I'd be intending to make a lot more readable, at least. So where we have these long chained commands with a lot of implicit knowledge required, that the language, the Laurel language, will be able to compete in terms of not necessarily code size and succinctness, but hopefully in terms of readability anyway. So that'll be kind of a little project that I'll be setting myself and will help drive some of these features. So, for example, if any of these features are missing, as I come across them, I'll be attempting to either figure out a solution to why those features might not be needed, or else come up with competing features. So that's basically where I'm probably going to go from today. I haven't done too much prep on this now, so we'll see how far we get. But I think the first bit will be hopefully what am I trying to say here? First bit will hopefully be not too complicated, at least. So we'll start off with test.txt. What I'll do is I'll rename that to test process, and I'll call this docker get .laurel, and I'll update main so that is what will be evaluated. And at some point, I feel like in fact, I'll have to stop this loop because it's currently listening for bash dev loop. Let me just see. Yeah, it just listens for changes in the source directory. That's actually fine. So one thing that I still haven't addressed, and I will have to address at some point as well, this will nearly force me to do that, is proper handling for comments and rendering the source of errors. But we'll see how far we get before we're nearly forced to do that. So first of all, we have the shebang line. I'll be leaving that out. That can be added if necessary. Set E, that won't be necessary either. Script commit SHA, we'll grab that, and that will be just put up there. And for this will be, and because this language, or in this language, white space doesn't matter. You don't need to kind of remove the space around the equals. We can kind of format it like this. And there shouldn't be any output here, but yeah, that's the first statement done. And here's the first, say, new feature that we'll require. So in Bash, we have this. So I'll be rendering this as version. And there's actually a bit going on here. So first is accessing the global environment. Second is interpolation, which won't actually be needed by us right away here. The main thing that I'll be doing is adding some kind of built-in functionality to remove so is that in my head, I was thinking it strips the trailing V, but it actually strips the V prefix. Even though it's on the right-hand side, it removes the prefix. So the way I'll be looking at this is, first of all, I'll need some mechanism for accessing the environment. And second thing I'll need, and actually that's a good point, is that if version isn't defined, I'll need to handle that as well. So to do handle the case where version isn't defined, and this is actually quite interesting on its own as well. So there's a couple of things happening. First, we'll be accessing the process environment. Second, will be adding string manipulation in the standard library, and I have a specific, slightly more advanced way that I want to go about doing this. I actually won't define that as part of the standard library as such. And then the final thing will be handling the case where version isn't defined. So first of all, what I'm going to want to do is get the value from the environment. And the way I'll do that is I'll have long-term, I have a couple of ideas about this. The process context, so it's environment, it's the file descriptors that get passed to it, the working directory, the arguments, all those kind of things I would like, if I was making a really robust language, those would come in main and would have to be propagated properly throughout the system using dependency injection and so on. Because this is a scripting language and we want to keep things light and easy to use and quick to the point, I'm going to introduce a standard library module, which will be, it'll be kind of a slightly reflection based. In fact, maybe it'll belong in Reflect, but basically a module where you can access the same context that would be getting passed into main, but it can be accessed kind of anywhere. So it's basically, this is the same object that would be passed into main if I were doing it that way in the more robust approach. But yeah, so we'll have prosenv, and we'll be able to access version, something like that. Now, even straight away, one thing that could be an issue here is that if the version environment variable, if there is no version environment variable, then that would fail, and that would the default behavior of this language will be that errors like that will essentially panic. Those panic or exception, those panic/exceptions can be caught, but for something like this, for accessing values in an object, I was thinking about this earlier today, even that I ideally do want a more lightweight syntax. So we might look at something more like this for cases where we think, so we'll use this kind of syntax where we have a high degree of certainty that the developer expectation is that that field is there, and if it's not there, then it's actually a failure of the program. Whereas this syntax would be for cases where that value just might not be there as a result of user behavior, for example. So the user just didn't provide this value. And so in this kind of case, this will do a Go style, at the moment anyway, this will do a Go style return or value evaluation, where it returns a tuple, which is just defined as a list in this language. And the idea here would be if the value is found, then OK is true and the value is put into the left-hand side. But if the value isn't found, then OK will be false, and we can do some correction here. So the most straightforward correction that we'd do here is provide a default version, which would just be, oh, thanks, Klaus Ever Walking Dev, I think that was the name. Thanks for following. So, so this is in theory what some of this will, the first bit of this. Now, one thing I'm just thinking as well is, again, I alluded to this a few minutes ago, but whether this will be in reflect process environment or if it'll just be in process. I'm tempted to just put it in process. Realistically, like I was thinking, one nice thing about putting in reflect is that, okay, all the stuff to do with built-in stuff, so things that you can't write in Laurel itself, so to speak. I was thinking, okay, we'll put all that in reflect, but realistically, lots of the packages are going to have are likely to have built-ins that you can't write in the Laurel programming language itself. So yeah, there comes a point where you think about things too much as well. So what I'll do is, another thing to think about is that we have either import process or put it as a string or put it in braces. Yeah, there's a lot that can be done here in terms of defining the actual import syntax. It's one of these things where I haven't thought about it too much. Like, there are lots of approaches I can take. I'm more interested in the actual semantics of the importing at the moment than the actual syntax. So what I'll do is just to keep the whole thing motoring, is I'll take this kind of a more straightforward syntax for now. So if we have, I'll just define the standard library, and at the moment the standard library will always just be a single alphanumeric with underscores component, and it'll be mapped to the same object. Hopefully that'll be what I mean by that will be clearer in time. So first things first, I'll probably want to, and eventually I'll probably have a prelude as well, which will define prints and things. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. First thing to do is just define the the process module and importing. So let's go ahead and jump into LALRPOP. And so this will be a statement. And at the moment, it's just going to be import, and it's going to be, now we have two types of string literals. For this, I'm going to say that it actually has to be a quoted string literal. And so we're going to separate the two of those. And yeah, import and that will be name, import name, and then we're going to have, yeah, the AST is going to have to get updated with that. And then finally, we're going to have to add some new evaluation. I really should put put a bunch of these test files into a separate directory. Maybe I'll do that after this commit. So yeah, so we have a non-exhaustive pattern there. So let's go ahead and add support for that. So we're going to import name. And how is this going to work? So we're basically going to, for the standard library at the moment, again, not like eventually the standard library, how will it be evaluated actually? Because again, it won't necessarily be defined in the Laurel programming language. Like part that's going to actually be implemented in Rust and imported as built-in functions. To start out with, this is so that's not going to be building for the moment. Instead, I'll jump to main, where some of these modules are going to be implemented initially. So I have a definition of type here. So I'll define, I'll call it stdpros. And this won't actually be a function. It will be a new object. So there'll be a new valref. Now it would be nice to make a lot of these kind of immutable or frozen or something. Maybe. I don't love the idea of monkey patching, so that would be my instinct. But again, a lot of ideas, getting a bit ahead of myself. So so I'll have an object that will be defined in terms of props. Yeah, so it's just props. And it'll be defined as a hash map as well. Now, Is there an easy way of defining a hash map literal? So I kind of have one defined there, though it's defined as a vector of pairs. Let me just see Rust. So I don't think I'm running 1.51. Let me see my Docker file. Oh, I'm running 1.52. That's very handy. Vec from iterator. I'm not wanting a vector. I'm wanting a hash map. Oh, sorry. Hash map from iter. Ooh, bit yeah, bit heavy, but that should be all right. Let me just put it up here for now, and then I'll kind of merge it back into the rest of the imports in a bit. So then the props here, let's see. And let's try that much at least. Expected item. Can you declare global variables in Rust? I would assume so. But then I'm not so sure. So you have to define them as static, maybe, or const. Yeah, so maybe maybe my best bet actually is to just for the moment define it directly in main, and program gets evaluated there. And let's try that. 46. What's the issue there? Oh yeah. Expect a string found an integer. Oh yeah, that would make absolute sense. So the only thing that we're going to define there is that, and then we're also going to have, I'll just put it in a, I really have to have a more lightweight of defining this stuff eventually, but for the moment, just to get things working. Let's try that. Yeah, so that's what we expected. So let me just think the next thing then. So if yeah, this is gonna get pretty hairy. Eventually, I'll probably I have used is it some kind of literal macro before, which is useful, I think. Yeah, maplet. And I'll probably use that again at some point, but I'll do that as a refactoring rather than I'll just try and get something working here now for the moment. So we have this hash map. I will define now whether to call them packages or modules. Or something different. I think I'll go with I think the name module is slightly better, and then packages could be used for the actual package manager. But then if it has a package manager, does it make sense to call those packages, or is it worth having a distinction in the terminology? I'm not sure, but for the moment, I'll just call them packages here. And again, this will be another one to consider later. Consider, in fact, I will put that in the to-do list here as research. Terminology. And so now that's like that. And we have packages is like that. So then process will be defined as that, and it'll actually be the hash map. No, it'll be the whole thing. Yeah, that looks like a bit of a mess, doesn't it? But yeah, but should be all right to clean up. Yeah, eventually I'll probably have just something to wrap, because each value in general that I'm creating is going to be wrapped in this new val ref, and it's only the inside that changes. I might have some constructors to be like new object instead of having to create this kind of a contraption every time. But for the moment, does what I needed to do. Yeah, there we go. Is that compiling? No, it is not. 50, line 51. Oh yeah, need a semicolon. Yeah, so that's at least compiling. ENV will be will be evaluated at some point. But the next thing to do is Now I could do a cheeky hack and um, define packages as part of the environment, and then all um, I could define that as std. That's actually something that I was half considering before. And then import is almost, for the standard library, is almost like using Rust, where it just introduces kind of aliases for things that are somewhat in the scope already. The alternative is to pass it as a new parameter argument, which would require propagating that to all argument lists. But I think that will be, yeah, that's probably better for the moment. Not as easy to implement, uh, but I think long term, when I'll be refactoring this to a kind of a more structured approach, this will allow me to do that more easily, I think. So what I'll do is, yeah, eval prog will be taking the kind of standard library as an argument. And at the moment, env is just going to contain the value 1. So in the test, docker get Laurel process is just going to be an object containing the field env, and env is just going to have the value 1. But it will at least demonstrate the idea, I believe. So then in eval, all we need to do is now take standard, and that's currently a hash map of string to object, or string to yeah, we'll go string to object for now. Eventually I'll probably replace that with string to hash map, potentially, because each module I'll want the approach that each module is essentially an object. So this is a hash map of valref with source, and this will just get passed all over the place. I'll probably need to add it in there too. And then finally import well, this won't be the final bit. I would assume, pass it to lots of other places. Well, I would say, but we can do this. So it'll be standard get name, and that'll be package. This will be a match, and it'll be some package, and if there's a none, then it'll be error. That thing is not a standard package. Otherwise, it imports name and adds it to the environment. So let's see, assign let v is equal to that, and at the moment, let's see, we have scopes. And the left-hand side here will just be a variable. So it won't be an assignment, it'll be, let's say, a constant declaration. It'll have the value v, and the left-hand side will be a new AST production. Again, I don't love creating AST productions in the evaluator, but this is, I think, just how I'll have to do it here. And let's see where we are now. So we have a couple of issues due to the missing standard library parameter. So we'll try and resolve those. Now, there's probably a bunch of these values that can, or parameter values that can be bunched together, and I really need to spend a couple of extra sessions of this stream just doing refactoring, but like putting all these into different files. Like, I mean, it's coming up to 1,500 lines in this file at this point. So, but for the moment, we'll just keep it as is. There we go. Yeah, I really need to integrate Vim with the language server for Rust at some point, because you know even having something like jump to definition is becoming a necessity more than a nice to have at this point. Okay, we'll try that. What's the top one I keep getting? So that's in a val line 99, a matching arm without braces. Yeah, so I think it's probably just the arguments issue at this point. 1168. Uh, 690. Oh no, 665. Oh, and I have to pass it into all the bind functions as well. Painful. But anyway, just do it one step at a time. So 627. I'll try that. Oh dear, have I? Oh yeah, because yeah, that could actually be problematic at some point as well. The fact that I'm using the same variable name as the standard crate. Yeah, probably wasn't the best idea there, but I can probably rename that at some point because anything I take out of the standard crate I use up here, so I shouldn't be using std throughout the rest of the file, so I should be all right. Line 55, expected 4 arguments. Oh, I didn't actually save the update to main. 14 errors. Two and six. Okay, line 105, what's going on there? Expected a struct but found a reference. Can I clone that arcmutex? And then line 104, var name, expected a string. And then line 55, no, that's in main. Yeah, I need to borrow that. Oh, I'm not gonna have to apply that to std everywhere in this file. Yeah, I'll wait for the borrow checker to complain first. So 665, that's in bind, yeah. So I need to update that too. Okay, so here. Oh, I don't have uh, borrow issues because they were coming in as references and then just being passed kind of as is, so that's all right. Okay, and then line 460, that's not being used. So bind name doesn't need to be passed that. And so realistically, then this bind name doesn't need to be passed it. Okay, that was fairly arduous. Really need to get some better refactoring tools, but it's working now at least. We have some kind of uh, bare implementation of I really need to stop going to test.txt. Some kind of bare implementation of package importing. So now the next thing to do, maybe I'll just save that as is as a snapshot. Yeah, I'm not going through all that. I'm just going to add as is. Oh, those are from, yeah, those. Oh yeah, I wanted to change that actually. So in main.rust, I wanted to put those up there with the rest. Okay, and then, yeah, add rudimentary implementation of for import. Okay, so with that done now, we'll go back to Docker get, and what I want to do is replace it with the actual environment. So I assume in Rust I assume that I can get it as a hash map of string to string. So Rust get environment. And env vars. Yeah, so returns an iterator. I wonder, can I just do a something like object props, and that'll be I can probably do a from iter for that, though I'll have to map the values. Yeah. So first of all, try this, just to turn it from to try and turn it from an iterator into a hash map. Yeah, and so that's part of it anyway. Who getting very deeply nested here, but as ever. So it's already a map, or it's already an iterator. So hopefully I can do v new valref value string s, and those should all be strings anyway, so there shouldn't be although there'll probably be oh no, they're not, they don't come in as vars os or os strings, they come in as, yeah, regular strings. That's okay. So expect a string found at tuple. Oh yes, yes. So in this case, I want to map it to k and v and give back. Oh, this is looking so so deeply nested, but yeah, maybe as soon as I get this working, I'll start replacing try and replace part of it with maplet anyway. I wonder if maplet will be able to handle those two strings as well. So that's eval ref. Okay, so we've got the environment now getting injected into the program. So import environment as part of process package. Now, looks like the formatting is off there slightly. Oh, because the formatting module doesn't actually handle indentation at the moment, so everything is just indented by one level. Yeah, I'm probably not going to resolve that right now. That's something to handle in time as well. So anyway, we have that running at least. So source docker, I'd have to pass eval prog. Yeah, I'll leave that the way it is. I won't inject a version at the moment. Hopefully that's all right. Actually, this reminds me. This is one thing that I need to revise based on the so the field access shorthand for objects has to be revised since I introduced the dollar syntax for identifiers, and because this would require, it currently requires me to use a dollar on the field access, and I don't think that's quite necessary. So what I'll do is I'll try and remove that from the parser itself. So when we're doing a field access, these usually take identifiers, and it still will, but I'll call this I know, a raw identifier. I don't love the fact that it's kind of, there's a I suppose that inconsistency between identifiers in one context versus another, but I think this is yeah, I don't think I really want the dollars in that context. So let's take a look here. Ambiguity detected between that terminal and, oh yes, because this can start with a digit. So let's try that. Ambiguity between that and that. Interesting, actually, yeah. So that could be matched as, so both of those could be matched as the same token, an unquoted string literal versus a raw identifier. Maybe what I'll do is have an unquoted string literal. Now I'm going to want to remove the hyphens from that. I can explain that in a separate episode why I would want to do that. But for the moment, let's just do it like this. Now, yeah, I'm gonna have to make some notes here because I'm getting into kind of tricky territory. Oh, did I press num lock there? I have to no, I'm not sure if that's going to. No, I still have control over my keyboard. That's all right. Anyway, so make a big note here using unquoted string literal for map access. Or object access, really. Okay. So, yeah, so at least back to where I was in terms of, this can now be. Oops, just a sec, I have to plug in the laptop. Thought it would last longer on that charge because, well, I suppose the streaming software itself probably takes a bit of charge. Now coming back to this, I feel like, okay, yeah, so that's what the numlock is doing. So I'm trying to type W here, but it's typing 2. So how do I how do I undo this? This is yeah, embarrassing, frankly. Keypad maybe? Okay, yes, there we go. Okay, we're back in business. Whew. So going back to where I was, yeah, so we're accessing the environment through this imported process object. And next thing we want to do is access version if it's there. Now, first thing to note is if we try to access it like this, because this would be fine if we knew that version was being imported. For example, can I do this actually? So if I have dev loop and if I pass in environment version 123 or 12.34, and I'll start the environment again. Oops. Yeah, and so it gets output as expected, but then if we don't have that environment variable, then it crashes essentially. So what I'll do is I'll actually keep that in there so that we can test with it and we can test the string prefix stripping. But I want to introduce this new syntax for kind of optionally retrieving a property from an object. Now, whether this is so this is, I think, in the research section of the to-do list. which is, oh, is it not? Where? Oh, safe lookup, yeah, in the research section. Now, whether this is something that I do want to have as a shorthand, because again, it's something that eventually will be technically possible via other means, but I suppose again it'll be like, yeah, it's the decision. Do I want to add in extra syntax for this? You know, one of the nice things about Go, for example, is that they keep special syntax to a minimum. You know, maybe it would make more sense to have a built-in function for something like this. But yeah, I suppose again, I can do something like this to just keep things moving at the moment, but then have it in the to-do list as something to research further. And as well as I'm doing projects such as this one where I work through this sample code, you know, I'll get a feel as well for how much utility it actually provides. If it's something that I end up relying on a lot, then maybe it's something that, you know, is useful enough to keep around on a more permanent basis. But anyway, let's take a look at this. So we have lookup for location, and it's an index operation as well. But we will have just an extra Boolean flag to say, I was going to say safe, but that's a bit of a cop out of of a field name, I feel. Um, um, Error on none, error if missing, um, infallible if it panics, um, yeah, maybe required, and that'll be required false, that'll be required true. And again, you know, the exact syntax here is something that I'll have to decide. Um, maybe I'll have a, a bang syntax if it can recover from the value not being there. But for the moment, I'm just going to do it like this. Yeah, that's not in the AST. I do like the way Rust, when you add these new productions, it basically says, hey, you haven't actually implemented. Well, it makes sense here, but then once I actually add this to that location, so if I go index and I go required bool, it's basically gonna jump me to the eval section and say, hey, you haven't actually implemented this, which is really nice, I think. So there's probably a get call somewhere in here, and if it's none, then we check, okay, is if it's required, then we return an error. Do those all have to be returns? They probably don't. I might refactor that in a sec. So if it's required, then do return an error. Otherwise, return OK. And this is going to return a no, sorry, this is going to be different. So So if I were to do it that way, it would basically the value would change, or the type that's returned from the expression would change depending on whether the value is there or not. What I actually want to do is um, basically say if the value is required, and yeah, required is probably the wrong word here, but if the value is required, then yeah, I think required probably is the wrong word there. Um, so we have two scenarios. One is that when we do the lookup, it returns the value and essentially panics if it's not there. The other situation is that it always returns a value, but it's a list. It returns the value and true if it was found, and null and false if it wasn't found. So let's take a look. And let's see. New val ref value, no, list x's vec, and in this we have v clone, I suppose, and value bool be true, otherwise we have a value null, and in that case bool is false. And so what's going wrong here? 810. That should be a new val ref, yeah. And 796. Yeah, and so there's a missing pattern match there as well. Is that a one that we don't have to handle? So that's in bind, yeah. So we just get rid of that. Oh yes, so this is in a bind. So I'm going to say again to avoid redundancy, so you won't be able to do, and this kind of highlights maybe one of the reasons why this, why the current implementation I'm working with maybe isn't the best solution for this long term, because we now are saying, what's the behavior of this? And that's what's being defined in here. For the moment, that'll be a runtime check to say that, you can't use this syntax to assign variables. But yeah, I think it does kind of highlight the kind of the lack of symmetry there. It'd probably be nicer to have some other syntax for this. Kind of safe accessing of variables at some point. So at least now I have the two the two behaviors. So hopefully I can use this to help determine what I should call the trigger to switch between the two. So the first is essentially panic if missing, and the other is return list or return sentinel. Or kind of try. So maybe if I call that, oops, try. Or maybe no panic. So there could be panic, a panicking version or a non-panicking version. Is there a way to make that terminology always positive? So if always panic, if no panic, I'll call it no panic for now, but that's to be TBD. Again, even the fact that the terminology isn't really kind of making itself obvious for this, and the fact that the field is inverted, so to speak. There's a lot here kind of telling me that this probably isn't the way to go long term, but we'll keep at it for now, and I'll add a comment to flag that for later. Maybe safe really is the kind of is a better yeah, I'll call it safe. Still not loving the terminology safe, but it probably is better than no panic. And and I think I will still add a comment to kind of investigate more later. Let's see. Okay, and so and I actually need to implement it in that second place as well. So on objects. Yeah. Um, Apologies, Matter Henje. Absolutely. I suppose the main reason for that is not taking enough time to actually refactor the code base in between sessions. These general Saturday sessions, I try to just kind of progress with the language itself. But at this point, yeah, even though I'm committing it to a public repository, I can't imagine it being kind of legible, but anyone but myself. So I really need to take some time between sessions to actually, yeah, work on the nesting in particular, and splitting it up, splitting the code up into different modules, and also different uh, just kind of smaller functions realistically. But yeah, very fair observation, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of these things as well, especially with side projects. It's like, do I keep doing the fun stuff, or do I actually, apply some discipline to myself today? And as you could probably see, it's been a while since I actually applied some discipline. So yeah, apologies, apologies. Um, but yeah, it'll. I'm sure it'll work out at some point. So so the safe version then, if we get some v, then yeah, this is a slightly different one because we have to clone the value at the prop location. And then once we do that, we'll return that. And then for this one, it should be the same as before. So let's see. Nope, getting a lot of errors there. Oh, thanks for the questions. So how far am I along with the language? So it's kind of realistically just getting started to a certain extent. So what I'm actually working on at the moment is I'm basically the second session in to and thanks for the question, by the way. I'm basically the second session into what I would call the novel parts of this scripting language that I'm working on called the Laurel scripting language, or Laurel programming language. Up until now, I was basically fleshing out basically the kernel, or the seed of the language, which was just a collection of fairly nondescript, typical language features, such as like if I take a look at JSON stringify, it's kind of your standard, strings, integers, lists and arrays and objects style language with destructuring and range indexing, things like that. Kind of all the the normal trappings of a lot of the kind of typical scripting language features. Where I am at now though is I'm at the point where I've just recently added in the kind of the more novel aspects of the language that I was mentioning. So if I take a look at test.txt, so this will be a scripting language for essentially competing with Bash to run languages on the command line. So in fact, if I open docker get Laurel, I can probably do a quick demo of, say, oh, in fact, the thing isn't building at the moment. Maybe if I do a quick git stash, and I'll save this, and yeah, I'll overwrite that. But basically, I can so it's got the, like I said, the usual bells and whistles. It's kind of more regularly structured than Bash, but I've added this a couple of basic rules, such as you can actually perform a call on a string to have it basically evaluate a program. So I can do an ls here, and it actually just captures the output. So I'll have to and it doesn't kind of automatically inherit the kind of standard file descriptors. So so I actually have to print the returned object, which contains standard error, standard out, and exit code. But I can also do and I can do another example that I have is so I can do git status, for example. But then, so if this evaluates, so we have git status, yeah, on that branch. But then if I decide that this is a subcommand of this command, then I also have a kind of I suppose a syntactic sugar to make subcommands look a little more familiar. So this looks nearly a little more like a method access rather than a process call, because I've taken, even though this is still a positional argument to Git, it's composed in such a way that it looks like it's kind of object orientated, and it's kind of nice. For example, something else that we have is Docker volume. I think is it list, and again, I think something like that looks, it evaluates to the same as no such file or directory. Okay, so I don't think I've exposed Docker within this environment yet, but basically it's compared to something like this, where that to me looks like these are actually parameters to the Docker command, so to speak, whereas this is more like, okay, you're actually accessing a particular function of Docker. Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, and that's the idea, is that like Bash still does have a lot of ergonomics, and I do want to kind of, I've had a lot of animosity towards Bash over the years, but I do accept that Bash does have a lot going for it and is very ergonomic. Like it's kind of as lightweight as you can get a command language to be, in terms of you just pass in the arguments, they're automatically strings all the time, and you just use white space to separate them. But I do think that having that much flexibility almost does have a cost, and Bash does have a lot of idiosyncrasies that that, this is just kind of my attempt to make things a little more structured, little more, I suppose, mainstream, like have a language that can still have capture the ergonomics of Bash, but still looks and feels like an intuitive modern programming language. That's the idea anyway. We'll see if it works out. But I know some of the ideas that I've been kind of playing around with so far, even just like the likes of these two, seem to work pretty well. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm happy with how it's going so far anyway. But anyway, that was just a quick digression. Let's see. I'll yank those. I'll git git checkout source docker get, and then I'll pop, and then I'll. Oh no, that's the way it was before anyway. Yeah, no problem at all. Sure, I love showing this stuff off. So, so thanks very much for asking about it, Matter. Sorry, I'm probably butchering the handle, but Matter Henji. And so, yeah, thanks for your interest. So, yes, so we're back here now. Let's see what the status is. I so eval has changed since I've last written to it. So let me see if I write to that, it'll this should still be kind of in a bit of a tizzy. Okay, so it's still building the actual parser. So before that finishes, let's see if I can figure out what the error I was getting was. So it's some kind of syntax issue that is just kind of snowballing really. And it's an unclosed delimiter. It seems to be starting on line 712. No, so 835 might not be closed properly. Let's see. Oh yeah, do I have an extra? I have an extra brace there. Yeah, okay. So we've gone down to from over 99 errors to 4 errors. So that's good return on effort. So jump to 349. So in this case, this is accessing an index in the case of an assignment. I'm going to capture this and say, if you're attempting to do an assignment with the safe version of this operator, then that's not allowed. So I can probably, yeah, just put it in there actually. If safe, return error, and that is can't use safe indexing with a can't assign to safe index. And so we have line 837. What's going on here? Get n as usize. So yeah, so that should be a props get, I believe. And 849. That is so I can actually return that instead, I think. Yeah, and similarly there, I can remove that. And 839, is that so where did that come from originally? Oh no, I have the parallel down there. So let's see. We have prop val clone. So in fact, why don't I grab that? And yeah, the indentation here is something else. Like, I mean, I've I've tabs with 4 spaces, and I'm almost at my 80 character limit. So yeah, that's pretty bad. Definitely have to dedicate a few intermediate sessions actually cleaning up the code base before I go too much further. But anyway, that's that feature implemented, at least I believe. So what's happening here is, okay, is that working? I'm not sure that it is. So let's take a look at what does env contain. So it doesn't contain, it contains Rust version. Okay, so and then if I access version for example, then it'll return null and false. But if I access Rust version, it should give me the actual string and true. So that gives me, you know, the flexibility to do the kind of Go approach. So let's see. And I'll go back into my dev loop. Oh yeah, I was wondering why that hadn't propagated inside. So yeah, so I have a version in here now, and what I can do is I can do let version okay is equal to that, and then, you know, I can print version, and I can print okay. But basically then if it's not okay, then version will just be empty. And with that done, if I print version at the end, then, oh, and I can get rid of the printing of the process. But let's see. Yeah, that just outputs the version, and then if for whatever reason I got the name wrong, or the value just wasn't provided, then we'd have this default value instead of it being null. So that's cool enough. And so I've just gone over time, but I think I'm good to do another little bit. Matter Henje, so I assume it's still too early for you to have set up a website forum and a community for this language. Yeah, absolutely. So it's very much in the early stages. Kind of it's more idea than actual implementation at the moment. Having said that, the you know most of the I would say most of the core is now kind of done, and a lot of what I'm doing now is kind of playing around and experimenting with some of those different ideas. Um, the code base itself, like you've seen, isn't probably in a say fit state to start accepting pull requests on the Rust source code as such. But hopefully I can start tidying that up soon enough. But the main place to, I suppose, take a look at what's there and potentially even just play around with it if you wanted to, is I think there's a link down here towards the bottom right of the screen. So on GitHub, I have Izanmoto Norpal up there. That's where I'm. Norpal was the kind of core language that I was using as this kind of language kernel that Laurel is then built on top of. Um, again, it's not in the prettiest state, but it's at least kind of functional. Um, in fact, I'm not sure that there's even a README, so it's probably, you know, probably would need a little bit more, few more of these sessions before I would say it's ready to kind of play around with. But yeah, sometime in the near future, maybe I'll put up kind of a play.laurel.com or something, just for people to play around with it. But it's still, yeah, it's possible, but it probably wouldn't be a too fun of an experience so far anyway. But hopefully, it's been coming to at the same time. It's been coming together quickly enough. I think I only started working on this kind of halfway through the year, and it's been mostly just kind of 2 hours every weekend, and I'm fairly happy with how fast it's been coming along even in that time. So yeah. Oh well, thanks very much. Me too. Hopefully, I am quite excited about these ideas. Again, different people are working on these problems in different ways. I know the author of the oil language is working on this on a similar problem space, but in kind of, I would say, nearly the opposite direction, coming from the point of view of how do we keep uh, kind of bash syntax as is and backwards compatible almost, while still making it a bit more structured. And I'm nearly coming at the opposite direction. How do we nearly start from scratch and just take what we need and want from Bash? So yeah, it's good to have different implementations and different ideas. Yeah, unfortunately, this this is kind of one project of many as well for me. So I probably don't dedicate as much time as I probably want and should. But it's probably the one project that I'm working on most consistently as well. So, swings and roundabouts. But thanks very much for your interest. It's really motivating, at least, as well, to hear that there is interest in it, and that people would be would like to play around with it. So thanks very much for commenting. So anyway, oh sorry. So yeah, so where I am now, so it is kind of beyond the time limit of what I would generally dedicate to this part of this stream, but this last bit is interesting to me for a number of reasons. First of all, I would like to introduce a notion of so there are a couple of things around this. First of all is the notion of what do we call it? I suppose prototypes in the language. So very similar to JavaScript, where in JavaScript you have these prototype objects that are kind of carried around with each object. So if you have a string, you have an int or a number or any of these kind of things, each of those types have a prototype that define kind of extra object or extra methods kind of on a global scale. The issue I have with the JavaScript implementation, it's not, it's probably an issue you can work around for the most part. But for me, I'm a bit of I guess you could call it a purist. I like things to be, very explicit. Um, I don't like the idea that, for example, if I had this string type and I had this string X, and I could call, for example, strip suffix, or no, strip prefix in this case. And if I wanted to strip the prefix v, this kind of, the way I access this is the same way as I access every other method or field defined on this object. And this can lead to, I suppose, again, when you have one thing doing, or one mechanism for doing different things, different types of operation, you can get into this scenario where either, I could accidentally override the strip prefix function. It'd be, pretty obvious if I was doing it, potentially. But there are things like that, like shadowing, or even I suppose for years we had this, uh, you know, um, has own property defined in JavaScript, and it's only nearly when I'm working on this language that I understood, what's even going on with that, and just having this overlap, I I feel for JavaScript anyway confused things a lot. And what I'm thinking for this language is just to keep things very clear, because I think it's still useful having a kind of a prototype system. Well, not prototype, because prototype kind of nearly implies object oriented programming somewhat, but just a way of associating um, functions and methods with built-in types. I think that is very useful, because I was thinking about other ways of doing it, and it could be possible to do something like, even for something like len, I could have len x, and that would then be overloaded so that it could take any type, and it could do a type switch so that it calls a lower level length function on each of those. But I think there's something maybe a little nicer about something like that. Again, it's kind of an opinionated approach, but that's something that I was thinking about so far. And sorry, the actual bigger reason I'm excited about this, that I forgot earlier before I went into all this stuff about prototypes, but this is kind of one of the divergences, or ways that the Laurel programming language diverges from Bash. So Bash has tons of these, or Bash and Shell rather. Again, I talk about the two interchangeably, but Shell has like all these syntaxes for like stripping uh, prefixes, suffixes, replacing values inside, um, you know, matches inside a string, all these kind of things. And this is going to be just one of these areas where the Laurel language just replaces those with what I would hopefully say are more straightforward, you know, kind of language conveniences. So, we don't have, yes, this is probably, a much, would I say ergonomic? It's certainly a more succinct or terse um, definition of string splitting, or prefix stripping, but it's very much, you nearly have to know what this is doing before you can understand it. Whereas you need never have encountered this function before, and just by reading it, you kind of understand what it'll probably be doing. Whereas not so much so for this, and that kind of thing will really pay off, I think, later on when we encounter things like, if there's any work with, I'm not sure if it's being used here. Well, there's ifs, there's the ifs parameter to curl, which isn't the same, but if we have the, is it inter field specifier or something like that, that Bash uses to kind of automatically split strings, we'll be using just regular old, you know, uh, split. We'll have standard out from a program, and we'll go split on white, either space, or there might be, split uh, regex, or any combination, and we'll have, a for loop for field in, and all these kind of things where it's the same stuff as what Bash does, and probably not as succinct as Bash, but hopefully more readable. Oh, thanks, Manrahin. Yeah, the method call like appearance. Yeah, like the one the one drawback of the approach I'm using, which is kind of similar to JavaScript, where basically objects function as both um, objects and hash maps, means that you get this kind of reflection out of the box, so that if you define an object, you can just access the fields programmatically. But it does have the kind of the downside that that there is no kind of way of or clear way of having these kind of, like the way in Java you have this clear distinction between a class and a hash map, for example. So you can say, okay, on these classes or this base class, there are these methods defined, and they kind of propagate through the whole class hierarchy. Whereas since I'm using hash maps and kind of objects interchangeably, there's an overlap. And so I think it makes sense to have this distinction between the two. I think that, yeah, I also think that the method call syntax is probably a little prettier. Again, this is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to have the language core, so I could play around with different approaches. It makes sense to me now, but it's only kind of with trying it out and playing around with it will I hopefully see, does this make sense or not. Be nice as well at some point to actually to add syntax highlighting for the likes of Vim as well, just to even make the variables stand out a little bit more. But anyway, that's that's a task for maybe one of the extra sessions that I talk about. So yeah, so maybe I'll try that as one last task for today, and that will consist of a few different things. So I'll need a new syntax for kind of prototype calls. I'll need a new hash map object defining the kind of method namespace on different types. And then I'll also want to actually implement strip prefix. So this will be version will be, so whoops, this will be what will equate to, so I've this done, thankfully. In fact, did I commit what I have so far? Actually, I didn't. So what I'll do first is I'll get rid of that, and I'll do a git add for what I've done so far. And yeah, adds, oh, actually, there were two changes in there. So there was, yeah, that's actually a second one. So I'll commit that first. So I'll do git reset head here, and I'll yeah, so I'll skip that and that. Oh wait, what's S do? Does S do anything? Oh no, S is split, sorry. So I'll do no there. And yeah, unquoted string literal, and yeah. So allow object property access without a dollar symbol, and then I'll add the support for safe indexing. Syntax for our and then now that I've those done, it is coming. I suppose as I look at this and I think what is left to do in just this this amount. So what is left to do? So first, I would have to add support for if it's called prototype call, and that would be a new expression. That wouldn't be too problematic. It would be more or less the same as a regular call, just with a different syntax and to a different kind of namespace. Oh, hello, unavailable user 5. I'm good. How are you? Good to see you back again. So, so I could add that without too much difficulty. That would actually require a previous setup of the actual prototype namespace. Now, one thing about the prototype namespace as well is that I do want to I probably want to avoid allowing assignments to variables within that namespace. Now that should actually be all right because because I have this separate syntax, I have to manually define assignment on, for example, property access. So, oh, glad to hear you're great, unavailable user. I think a few weeks ago you were saying maybe you were going through a lower period, so I'm glad to hear things are going well. So, so we have X, and we'd have, for example, a strip prefix, and this would be, you know, say a function that we define. But then if we tried to do this, that wouldn't actually, we could actually prevent this at the evaluation level when we detect that we're trying to overwrite a variable within a prototype call. So so that's actually all right, because that's the behavior I want. I generally want to prevent overwriting values within these prototypes. I know that it can be very powerful, and there are probably valid frameworks and things in JavaScript that have used it to good effect, but there's also it's also kind of very easy to kind of do a lot of foot shooting with that. And I think anyone who's kind of familiar with is a monkey patching in Ruby kind of knows what the dangers are as well. So I don't love when languages build in kind of functionality that only the language can use. So such as, you know, a typical one is Go. Okay, only Go built-in functions can actually have generics. At the same time, this is basically just going to be kind of syntactic sugar for or yeah for making some function calls easier, so that, you know, we don't have to have a separate yeah, it's just to tidy up some specific use cases. So yeah, that's a trade-off that I'll be willing to make right now. So I need to actually implement that prototype namespace for strings, and then, you know, actually implement strip prefix, which realistically will just be you know, a call to the Rust function of the same name. So as I break it down like that, that doesn't actually seem too too onerous. So yeah, let's see. I'll give it another 30 minutes, and we'll see what we can get done in that amount of time. So at least, you know, it doesn't look the prettiest, but we have this kind of similar hash map setup made from earlier. So what I will do then is, and this will be, actually this is an interesting thought that that this could be a shorthand syntax for accessing special packages based on the type. So for example, I could have import string, and if you wanted to, you could do version is equal to string strip prefix version v, and it could could be comparable to the I think is a universal function call syntax in the likes of nim, which I only have passing familiarity with just because it was kind of someone on the stream a couple of weeks ago was kind of touting it and talking about the benefits. It would be a very stripped down version of that. Could be something to explore later anyway. Again, just an idea. It would make a central place for saving and accessing this stuff. So maybe will I put it in the standard library? For now, I actually will just to save on time, but I think I won't actually take that as long-term approach. But because of the effort that I spent earlier adding the standard library to the arguments of all the functions in eval, I'm actually just going to piggyback off of that work for the moment, even though this is a bit of a hack. But yeah, again, one of these times where I just want to see stuff working rather than necessarily doing the 100% best approach. Again, full disclaimer: this is the work in progress branch, so not production ready, but mostly for kind of trying things out and having fun. So so yeah, implement prototype namespace for strings. So this is going to be string. It's going to have one property at the moment. That'll be strip prefix. It'll be this will be a function, and let's see, and it'll be okay. This is interesting actually. How okay, yeah. I'll have to be a bit cheeky with how I'm implementing this, but it should be all right. Now I think that's how I implement it. Let's try that. And let's see, does that give an error? Yeah, so strip prefix, and so it's built-in func, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and I just have to implement strip prefix then. And I'll do can only call strip prefix on strings. This should never actually happen because um, it it should only be possible to call this on strings because it'll only be defined on the string prototype. Again, I should probably use a different word than prototype because it is distinct to how JavaScript, for example, does it. But yeah, I don't know what the correct term would be at the moment. But so I'll have value string s, and then the return value will be another string. And let's see if so the way Rust does strip prefix is it returns an optional or an option, I mean, sorry. Maybe trim start matches. But then if I have a combination, and then I go ABC, ABC, will it remove it twice? Yeah, whereas I just want to remove it once. Oops, I'm pressing the wrong button. Yeah, it does remove it twice. So I just want to remove the first occurrence. So back to strip prefix it is. And that will actually, does that mutate the original? Well, it doesn't take it takes a reference, but not a mutable reference. So it must, make sense that it, oh, well, good to see you anyway, Matter Henji, and thanks for all the messages, and yeah, have a good week anyway. Thanks. So yeah, so if I strip the prefix here, oops. So I'll go s strip prefix, and I'll go stripped there, and this will be a value string s, and it returns yeah, an actual string. So I'll have to, I think, convert it like that. And so if I go sum, then it'll be the actual stripped value. So I just return it as is. Otherwise, so I'll call that unstripped. And I'll return that. And yeah, let's see. So 185 takes one. Oh yeah. So it'll take. So I'll need to match on the second argument as well. So I'll call this So can I call strip prefix on strings, and so this will be source, or this will be unscript. Again, I need to do checking the number of parameters that get passed in are actually correct. But this will be the first argument to script prefix must be a string. And that'll be prefix. $190. And that's the first and last of these implemented. So the last is actually to but the last is to implement support for this new call syntax. And so, okay, so it's not a call actually, it's a prop. And so I'll say prototype is true if that syntax is used, and false otherwise. So then the AST needs to be updated for prop. And then I need to actually handle that in the evaluation. And so here is, like earlier, we just forbid it if it's an invalid access. So if it's a prototype access, then we say can't assign to properties of prototypes. And then the last one is to actually actually access this properly. So so this is where the the hackiness of the current approach comes in, and maybe this is where I'll add a comment to resolve this later. But let's see if I so first of all, I val the actual expression, and it'll be an object. Well, not necessarily an object anymore. So I'll just call that V, and it can be an object here. So basically what we have is again, apologies for the nesting, but we'll say that if it's prototype, do something, and then if it's not prototype, then we do something else. Excuse me. So it's a string for other types. So can only access prototype hasn't been defined for this type. So prototype object hasn't been defined for that type. Otherwise, what we do is we get string from the standard library. We get the function name that that is being referred to, and then that's more or less it, actually. Tricky part being that I don't have this implemented for prototypes, so this so I'm kind of relying on the fact that this is a special syntax. Yeah, that's actually a little trickier than what I had in mind. So, yeah, so what time are we at now? Yeah, I'll probably leave it there. It was a bit of a hacky version that I was going to have to refactor anyway. It looks like I'll probably have to actually refactor it as I'm implementing it, so that I just do the proper version from the get-go. There's probably a better way of doing what I'm doing anyway. But yeah, nice bit of work done today anyway. So we got what was there? Imports are now working. Very rudimentary version, but it's working nonetheless. I can access the process environment. I can access fields in a safe way, which wasn't possible before. That was done, and yeah, so I suppose the first bits are in place for. I suppose the idea has been explored, and the approach for handling type prototypes or prototype objects has been, I suppose, initially explored. So, again, yeah, probably not the cleanest code today, but at least the ideas are getting are kind of coming together and getting fleshed out. So yeah, so that's kind of yeah, I think that's more or less it for today's stream. Thanks very much to everyone who tuned in and kind of chatted and checked the project out. Yeah, thanks very much, and I hope to see everyone next week. Take care.